I'm going to start with the story about a cherry tree. Back in the day, when I was finishing my degree in landscape architecture at the University of Oregon, I wrote a paper about a cherry tree. It wasn't just any cherry. It was the beloved rootstock of most of the cultivated varieties we see now blooming on the streets of San Francisco today. I didn't do that. No, what's going on here? Can you not? No, back up. There we go. Thank you. The clicker's clicking by itself. So back to cherry trees. There were two interesting things about this cherry tree. One, that it's a very resilient plant, but it had been in a symbiotic relationship with human beings for 2,400 years, since the Romans. It was the secret sauce of gardeners and blooming ornamental cherry trees that we so prize in our gardens. And you can see those cherry trees on the streets of San Francisco now. They're blooming. But it had also escaped captivity in Oregon, and it had naturalized itself into the native forests of the Pacific Northwest. To botanists and environmental purists, this was a travesty, and it was labeled an invasive species. Yes. At the time of the early environmental movement, they were holding tight to the dualities of the wild and pristine over there and the dirty humans and the urbanity over here. But we are not separate. The Mazur cherry didn't care about what human beings, that drama. It quietly did what it was on the planet to do, which it bloomed where it found itself. And there's a lot of wisdom there. Humans are part of nature. There is no separation. And that is what my paper was about. It was a graphic survey of all the abundant marketing examples of it at the time about how Americans wanted natural products and were willing to just take them mindlessly because they were natural. Humans clearly wanted to be part of nature, as long as it wasn't too inconvenient, of course. There you go. Earth is the garden of change, and nature is our partner. If you believe, as I do, that there is only one presence and one power active in the universe, and that is love, then you understand. Our interconnected survival today depends on new approaches that are creative and innovative. Working in a dynamic system such as the environment is a humbling experience. It asks us to be mindful and to get out of our own way. Albert Einstein said this about consciousness: we can't solve the problems with the same kind of thinking that we created them with. So this being mindful is both the spiritual practice as well as good worldly, ecological, good governance. So why am I talking about the inner journey on the day that we should be talking about the earth, the outer world, the natural world? 1 billion people of our 8 billion celebrated Earth Day. I read that someplace. We now understand that we are an integral part of natural systems. The solution is not the duality of nature and an urban fortress. It's about the part being about both. We are part of that whole. I believe we came on the planet to learn to love and to ultimately be love. But until we heal enough, wrestle clarity from our monkey mind, heal our hearts by forgiving, finally letting go of the blame game. Until we do this, we will never be able to fully participate with the one. That's spiritual housekeeping 101. But in the end, and from the perspective of my current and third profession, being a hospice and bereavement chaplain, I have noticed that all our stories are just one story. And in the end, it's a love story. Of course, human beings do generate a lot of knuckleheaded adventures in learning to do that. We work through our stories that are not love, not reciprocal, and therefore not part of the circle of care that sustains us. And if we are wise, we ask and claim guidance on the path for our next right step, which may be all we can see in the moment. This is all improv. In a brave, joyful, living tapestry of life, we are all learning better every day to be authentic, not to fear change, to be uniquely used by the One, according to our talents and our gifts. To do that, we must know our gifts. And we can only do that by going within. Back to Mother Earth. How do we save her? Does she need saving? Christina Hager was the leader of the 2015 Paris Accord for climate change. She said this: "The planet has been around for 4.5 billion years. She was perfectly happy before we got here, and she will be perfectly happy if we're idiots enough to pull the ejector seat and leave." Human beings are speeding up the environmental changes, and it's the critters and the people who are in danger. The real question is, how do we love the earth and love ourselves? Howard Thurman said this: "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do it, because the world needs people who come alive." If we can do this, we can get out of our own way, to realize our sacred natures with the clarity of our gifts, and then the opportunities open up. Finding that holy ground in our own good earth, to do what is uniquely ours to do. This is the way out. Here are some great examples of the power of the One. The power of one, people loving the earth and others, where they stand, using their unique talents. Now, this is one of my favorite stories. Dr. Sam Wasser is a great example of using his gifts in the service of the earth. I doubt if he set out to be an international wildlife crime detective working with Interpol when he and his colleagues at the Center for Environmental Forensic Science at the University of Washington were doing the dirty work of discovering how to extract elephant DNA from their dung. Think about that. The word humble comes from humus, that rich soil amendment that was once just a lot of BS. Dr. Wasser and his team genotyped the samples from all over Africa and essentially created an elephant DNA map for the continent, which they used to match the ivory confiscated from poachers and shut them down. Yeah. The next example is Babcock Ranch versus Hurricane Ian. When Hurricane Ian subsided, it was clear something extraordinary had happened in the new town of Babcock Ranch in Florida, even with the extremes of climate change. It had been carefully designed in a resilient model for stormwater management that mimicked natural systems, rather than tending to ignore them as traditional treatment systems tend to do. Unlike the surrounding communities, Babcock Ranch did not flood. It did not lose power, thanks to the solar grid and its backup battery, and the hardening of power lines. Now many communities are pointing to this development as proof that we can do better. There's lots of examples like that. The next one, Stuart Pym, conservation scientist and founder of this nonprofit, Saving Nature, works to reconnect the islands of Brazil's Atlantic rainforest, which have been fragmented by clearcutting. And those patches of forests are isolated from one another. You can see clearcutting on one side and forest on the other. He said this, "I thought this was something I would have to live to 100 to see. But by connecting up these islands, these pieces of rainforest, by buying up pieces of land, and dedicating them to nature, they created corridors. And they found that the species came back faster than they ever thought possible. Separate, not separate, works better. Juanita Creek. Another example of how a single person claiming what is hers to do is Chef Smith of Cafe Juanita in Kirkland, Washington, an award-winning chef with her own restaurant, which was perched on this creek. It was increasingly threatened by erosion. And she chose to work with local officials and put in a great deal of her own money in bioengineering techniques to restore salmon habitat. The miracle was the salmon came back within a year. They hadn't been there for many years. It was her backyard, and it was hers to do. The next one, Ruth Gates. One scientist, Ruth Gates, did pioneering work at the University of Hawaii Marine Biology Institute. She began to notice unexpected pockets of resilience where coral was thriving, in spite of the destructive warming of the oceans. Coral reefs are critically important in climate change. They are only 1% of the ocean surface, but it's 25% of all marine life and the livelihoods of 500 million people. And they protect shorelines from erosion. The Bahamas Coral Reef Innovation Lab and Nature Conservancy are working to extend her work to help corals grow back by larval propagation of these naturally resilient corals. It's a big shift, they said. We've gone from thinking that we shouldn't be involved, that is, we are separate from nature, and now we are working with evolution, not against it. Sweet. And this, look at the scale of that. Nearby, one of those coral nurseries is in the Bahamas, is Ocean Atlas. See that person that's floating on the surface there? It's for scale. Ocean Atlas is an underwater sculpture by Jason DeClaire, a young girl crouched and holding up the ocean. It reflects a new way of partnering with nature, where responsibility and humility meets resilience and cooperation. Nature inspires us. We need inspiration to, as John Lewis says, make good trouble. Because the stakes are high, the work can be overwhelming. Eco-anxiety is a real thing. And like all fear, it can be debilitating. We need to fully participate in the circle of care. It's a lot like family caregivers, as I think about it. When caring for their loved ones, they must care for themselves to be available for the important work that matters. We do this with the practices of resilience and meditation, self-care, and prayer. Fostering a stronger connection with nature, get moving, fill up. Spend more time outdoors with nature and your own inner nature. Practice resiliency. Double down on your resiliency skills, on your spiritual practices. Renew. Take positive action, but know when to disengage. Find balance. A sustainable diet, donate some time, donate money. I donate to Dr. Sam and the elephants because I want to be part of that story every month. It's a great story. Find your story. Find what is yours to do. And the final thing is educate yourself, but curate your news. You can't drink from a fire hose. It's very important to get accurate information about the environment. But you need credible and trustworthy sources. I subscribe to Christian Science Monitor, which is a great weekly that is balanced and thoughtful. But I also challenge you to Google good environmental news. There's a lot of it. This is one, the tigers. The tiger population in 1930 was 40,000. In 1973, it was 1,400. And now it is a stable a stable breeding population of 3,200, and it's called a miracle of conservation. The Indian government, in concert with the World Wildlife Fund, has dedicated 2.5% of the land in India to wild tigers. It's amazing. The next is the good news. In spite of the turbulence of 2022, cutting ties to Russia, the UK has exceeded their electricity, almost a fifth of it is renewables, which is amazing. 22% is wind and solar. And this year is the first breakthrough of fusion. Fusion is a game changer, and it doesn't have any of the downside of the other ecological brother. It's the nuclear industry. And the interesting thing is that small can be big. The tiny country of the Netherlands is now the second largest exporter of agricultural products, food. Their vertical farming in their greenhouses grow as much as 10 times as much food as traditional methods. As an example of this efficiency, each pound of their tomatoes uses only half a gallon of water. The average, care to anybody guess what the average is worldwide?
A tomato, 50 gallons.
30 gallons.
30 gallons.
Yeah, for a pound of tomatoes. 30 gallons for a pound of tomatoes. So this is an example of innovation. We need this. And finally, I'm going to end with the ozone hole. The good news, as of the first of this year, the ozone hole is closed. We are on track to it to be completely healed by 2066. The ozone hole was first reported in 1970, but we didn't take action until there was a big hole in it in 1985. And we passed the 1987 Montreal Protocols, which is proof that if we move together, this works. It seems that humanity needs a wake-up call. Global warming is in my prayers for doing just that. I'm not denying that the size of the ecological or climate crisis is huge. I'm not spiritual bypassing, which is that unhealthy, self-denying hole that we fall into when we say we're fine when we're actually troubled. When we say we have no resentments and we're tripping over ourselves, seething with unforgivenesses from years past. I don't know how we're going to get out of this mess, but I believe in the powers of faith and hope and love. And I'm going to end with a story that might help. There was a farmer whose prize donkey fell into a dry well. It was a deep well, and it brayed and brayed, calling for help. The farmer was a fellow of modest means. He didn't have a clue as to how to save his donkey. He was sad, but what could he do? He decided that he could do something about the dangerous dry well, and he decided, I can at least fill it in. So he started with a shovel full of dirt, and he kept it up. He invited his neighbors to help with any fill that they didn't need. Everyone had something. Little by little, they filled up the well, and when it was complete, the donkey stepped out and went about her business. There's a power in sweet, small steps, doing the next right thing, and listening to the still, small voice of guidance. Because that creative force, the creativity of the one, made this universe. If we listen, Spirit will inspire us to do the next right thing, to survive out of love. I know this, that love is always up to the challenge if we are. So as I invite the music team up to begin our music meditation, I invite you to drop deep into your well, into your holy ground, to sit with what is yours to do. How can you love the planet? How can you love? What are your gifts, your unique gifts that Spirit needs you to do?